I'm Meredith DePaulo from Carrots&Cake, and tonight we have a special guest. We're going to have another fun chat with one of our favorite guests, author Carrie Rogers-Whitehead, who is the founder of Digital Responsibility. She teaches tens of thousands of students, parents, and teachers every year about digital citizenship. Welcome, Carrie.
Thanks for having me back.
I have a different topic for us this time, and I think it's something that a lot of families are
hmm
wondering about, particularly
hmm
as we're getting close to the end of the school year, which means our
Yeah.
kids are going to have, you know, big amounts of time that needs to be filled, and parents are trying to come up with ways that they're going to be doing that. But I want to talk about
hmm
family
Yeah.
situations where people are co-parenting, but they're maybe not a couple any longer. They're in different households, and talking about screen time. How important is it that both of those people are on the same page about their screen time values?
Yeah, that's a big and it's a growing issue. I'll tell you the other day, Meredith, I was talking to a friend who went through a divorce the other last year, and they actually wrote it up in their custody agreement of how they were going to do technology and phones and had all of these rules. I didn't write it up in mine, and now I'm like, oh crap, is this going to come bite me in a few years here? When we have all the, we don't have a smartphone yet, so it's a growing issue, and it's interesting to me that now you have more lawyers and the legal side of things drafting that up, because it is a tricky subject, and there's not much control you have of what's happening in the other place. But to answer your question some more on the screen time importance, it's confusing for kids. And if you want to have you want to develop those values, having routines and rituals. I like to use the word ritual a lot too. They're really important for kids. They feel safe when they understand what to expect next. It's not as confusing, and it just makes their world a little bit confusing of where they go. Things change, and it's hard to also enforce your own family's norms and values and rituals when it's not backed up in the other way, or you get criticism or all of that. It just makes it higher stress, maybe higher anxiety environment for all the family.
Wow, yeah, that's so interesting that people are actually writing it into divorce agreements
Yeah.
now. I wonder, like, is that something that the,
Yeah.
the parents are coming up with? Like, this is a good issue, or are lawyers like, this is the template now? Like, we have to hit this point.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one. I can just speak from anecdotally that it was coming from the parents, because it was just the kids are getting a little bit older. What does that look like? But you can also run into issues. I mean, especially you have these step families and these blended families that you might have multiple kids that are dealing with different rules in different homes. So let's say you have a blended family, then you've got maybe two kids used to one, like these two
Wow.
parents, and these other two kids used to these other two parents. So then you've got like four sets of rules and norms. And so with one friend, this one set of like step kids, they have completely different rules, and they don't even have access to any of the passwords or devices or anything. They can't. They might even have to get a court order to access some of that phone for that individual kid there. So it gets even more complicated, because you might have, it's not just like maybe two families, it might be four families in one household, four sets of rules and norms that you're trying to evaluate. So some of that is trying to maybe head that off. But like, for example, my friend, she legally can't get the password. The mom won't give it to her. So what is she supposed to do? Like, she can ban it completely, but then it's an issue of, if the court order says that there has to be contact between the kid and the family, then you've cut off that contact, and that's violating the agreement too, because there needs to be contact between the kids and their parents as they go back and forth. So the phone could be that source. You can't just necessarily say, nope, you can't do it. That could be in violation of the order too. So it gets very complicated. I imagine you're going to have more of these conversations and law and lawyers and people maybe even specializing at this as time goes on.
Wow, you have taken it to a level that
Yeah.
I far beyond what I was thinking at all. Like this, wow, that is so complicated. And so to
Mhm,
me, like in an ideal world, the best thing to do would be if
mhm.
it's you and your ex, like if the two of you are able to
Yeah.
have a private conversation and get on the same page before talking to the kids.
Yeah.
That seems like the best thing to do. And also, like, you're right, if you have other partners kind of coming into play too, is there any language that you think,
Mhm,
so say I'm the
mhm.
parent who really is
Yeah.
into screen time and my partner doesn't really
Yeah.
seem to care. How can I start a conversation with that person and not seem judgmental? Because, sometimes everybody's waiting for an
Mhm.
argument and everybody's, emotions are running
Yeah.
so high. How can you kind of how can you kind of
Yeah.
gently bring this topic up?
Yeah, that's a great point. And hopefully there are some of those conversations before it all happens, but every, divorce and separation is different. Sometimes are high conflict, some are low conflict. It kind of depends on that relationship. But you raise a good question, and I think coming at it, like as I said, non-judgmentally, very, very gently, very like I would use like words like we're in that, we're working on this together. This is for the best of kid. Not like, make it nothing about you. Not no like I feel. It's more like this is best for the kid. I've noticed this in our home. And then, like, express some vulnerabilities. Like, we've seen this in our home. And I just want to be on the same page that we're all this is affecting us. I'm not saying, well, when over there, that happens. And then over here, like, maybe open up a little bit about that vulnerability to have that conversation, because immediately that can put someone on the defensive. Like, you're saying that that's happening over there and it's affecting you. No, just about what you're, that, but it can be tricky, and you have to kind of decide like when to let it go, because at the end of the day, sometimes you don't have a lot of that control over what happens in the other home. And so then you kind of maybe shift the conversation. If that is not successful with, the ex, then having it with the kid is like, well, that's over here. Well, this is what we do here. That's what happens over there. And you have those conversations instead of with the other partner.
Yeah. So actually, it would be great if you could talk about that a little bit more. So if say you and
Mm-hmm.
your partner can't agree, and
Mm-hmm.
you don't want, you want to have good values in the child in terms of screen time, but you don't want to pass judgment on that partner. You don't want to vilify that partner.
Yeah.
How do you then talk to your children about, like, other than just saying these are rules at this house, those are rules at that house? Like, how would you? Because obviously the kid is
Yeah.
going to be just like
Yeah.
feeling like a mess, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it can be confusing, and it depends also on the age of the child. But the way I'd frame it is like there's rules different everywhere, right? There's a different rule at school, there's a different rule at grandma's house, there's a different rule at the store and the park and home. And so you frame it as not as like our house's rules, their house's rules, but there are rules in different places across the world we live in. And you can't just bring your you can't bring your play your game in the middle of a church service. You can't bring it to the pool. You can't bring it to your class. So there's those rules, and you need to like ask, have them self advocate, and they need to kind of figure out their own rules, because you're not always going to be in those spaces. So encourage them to speak up for themselves, to understand what that looks like, and then reinforcing, well, they do it here and we do it this way, but not using in like good or bad or those like words, just saying different, and not like a judgment like word, like keeping it very, very neutral, because this is something our kids have to navigate. This is something adults have to navigate. Is you just can't, sometimes adults don't navigate it as well. It's like our own phone etiquette in different places. You can't necessarily do that as much as you want to. So it's kind of a life lesson that we all have to learn.
Yeah, that's terrific because that's really good advice when you don't want to undermine anybody
Mm-hmm.
else, but you want to have your rules at your own house. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
this like brings up something else in terms of screen
Mm-hmm.
time, because like you're always hearing experts are saying, oh, this amount for this age, this amount for this age, but you figure it out for your own child and what works for your family. Now, what
Mm-hmm.
if the partner is of the opinion that, hey, 24/7 anything goes, let's have the TV on, let's have the computer, the iPad, you know
Mm-hmm.
sky's the limit. So do you
Yeah.
then need to make up for that at your house and say no screen time, and
Mm.
then risk becoming the bad guy because you're trying to
That's a
balance it, or does that not count?
Yeah. That's a great question, and it's a complicated one. And I'll share a little bit of my experience working with foster families. I have trained a lot of foster parents around technology and screen time, and this is a big issue that comes up with them because they've moved from multiple families with all of these different rules, and then maybe the foster parent gets the kid at 13 or 14, and they've had 13, 14 years of different conflicting technology rules, and that is a recipe for a high conflict situation. So I would say that if it is an older kid, you are just setting yourself up for just fight after fight after fight, and finding that middle ground, because like not going extreme one way or necessarily the other, and acknowledging that this has been confusing for the kid for all of those years, and kind of like having a little bit of grace with it. The younger kids, it's a different situation. You can kind of like maybe pull back a little bit more so they can get used to it. But if you go that direction, you kind of have to accept that what hill am I going to die on, and how far am I going to push this there, because you are creating yourself as the adversary, and you're making yourself the disciplinarian, and you're creating a situation that causes additional stress. So I'm not going to give like you one straight answer, but from working with foster parents, I saw this happen over and over again. And sometimes the ones that had like maybe a zero tolerance had most of the high conflict. That being said, sometimes the conflict is just a short period of time and then there's an adjustment, but sometimes there's never an adjustment, because in that situation, the children don't always know if they're going to be there forever. So why should I follow your rules, right? But if there's a situation that's not a foster care family, that they maybe have that feel that safety and security and consistency, then maybe you could push a little bit harder on that. But recognize that you've created an adversarial environment that you might not have intended to, and be prepared for conflict, be prepared for stress, and just accept that that's going to be what it's going to be like for a little bit. I know it sounds like weird when I say it, but sometimes if like you mentally say, this is going to be a fight and we're going to do our best, but we're going to be consistent, because it's better to be like consistent than back off, because then the kid learns, well, oh, if I just push far enough, when we just fight far enough, I'll get what I want. So if you're going to do it, you just commit is what I'm saying. You commit hard, and be consistent over a longer period of time, because change takes time for sure.
I would think if you're a single parent and you want to establish these rules and you're not being met halfway with your former partner, what
Mhm.
would you say are some of the specific issues that that single parent should be thinking about when they come up with the
Mhm.
rules, so then they can
Yeah.
really
Mhm.
feel like they put a lot of thought into it, and then that makes them more empowered, that makes it easier for them to stand by those rules and enforce them, and not
Yeah.
be like, after 10 minutes of nagging, yeah, all right, do whatever you want to do. What should they be thinking about when they come up with
Yeah.
a screen time plan?
Yeah. Well, you referenced earlier, Meredith, that like sometimes it's the rules and the advice is confusing around screen time. And I would wholeheartedly agree with that, partly because of the way we measure and the way we research that. A lot of like our data around screen time is done in snapshots over a long period of time. So it can be very confusing for parents to create their own rules. I referenced the American Academy of Pediatrics screen time, and they have like a media flow chart plan that you can use for the younger ages. But what's they have like 2 years is like 18 months, or 2 years and below, it's like very little to no screen time, and then it kind of opens up over time. But what's interesting about the AAP's recommendations is at 6 they don't have any, except this one kind of thing that they mentioned, which is limit mobile devices. And I find that interesting, because that relates to that socialization piece. And so if you are going to have screen time, especially at the younger ages, look at it as a group and a social activity. So playing with a friend, great. Watching something as a family, great. That's social. Isolated by themselves on a tablet, not interacting with anybody, not so great. So I would maybe make those rules, have that stricter piece until they get to that grade area, and then look at it in terms of what are they doing and what's the socialization piece behind it, and then rate it there. So for us, we actually don't have many limits on gaming if it's done with friends or family together. Like if it is a social activity, we don't have like you do this much. All our limits are around passive or solo screen activities in our home, and that's how we kind of evaluate it.
Because I would also imagine, like, you should also think about the child and what the device sort of means for them, because maybe
Yeah,
this is their kind of stability factor when
yeah,
families are arguing, and like it's the one constant in their life and they can kind of escape into it. So
yeah,
yeah, realizing that actually it
yeah,
can be an important tool, but like you said, getting them to interact with it, that seems like
yeah,
something people might not be
yeah,
thinking about, that because you think of it as one-on-one screen and me and that's it, but actually it can be very social.
Yeah. And I like what you said about like that social piece is that if you do have a blended family and kids moving back and forth, that can be their connection to their friends and their home. Especially as summers come up. So you have, parents that live out of state, they live far apart. And so that kid might be away for half the summer, away from most of their friends in their network. And so that means that phone can be a really important piece there, and taking that away, even though maybe well intentioned to interact with the family, could be cutting them off from a lot of other people too. So helpful to keep that in mind, especially if these kids move back and forth between these different homes and are away from people that they love and care about.
Well, thanks again for joining me, Carrie Rogers-Whitehead. You always have such interesting advice, especially, and this is like difficult for the parents, difficult for the kids. This is a sticky topic, and I think you really shone a light that can help some people out.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Meredith.
We hope to have you back really soon. Take care.